I'm Lynette Zhang, Chief Market Analyst here at ITM Trading, a full-service physical gold and silver dealer specializing in custom strategies to help you survive and thrive the reset that we are already walking through. And on today's Coffee with Lynette, I am so happy to welcome back a very good friend and a very brilliant man, George Gammon. He is a macro addict, which certainly I am too, loves gold, and is also a rebel capitalist. In fact, he does a very popular podcast called The Rebel Capitalist Show. So, as well as an incredibly fantastic YouTube channel where he conducts a lot of really great in-depth interviews, as well as live Q&As, which I know you guys always have lots of questions. So this is really a key. The last time we talked was March 3rd. So it was back in the very beginning of when the coronavirus was starting to take over in the US. But wow, a lot of things have happened since then. So we have a lot to talk about today. And right now, he is coming to us live from St. Bart's, absolutely gorgeous. Hi, George. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Lynette. Wow, what an intro. I think I should quit while I'm ahead.
No, now you just have to live up to that.
Yeah,
That's
right,
all.
right.
That should be easy
Right.
for you.
Set the bar extremely high.
Yes. Well, I'm just going to dive right in and go to one of your key areas of expertise, which is real estate, because I get a lot of questions about real estate. And, housing in so many ways seems to be defying gravity, right? I mean, we have all of those layoffs. We have, an unemployment. Let's see. Oops, here we go. You've got 23 million. So 1 in 5 renters face eviction risk. So what does that do to that kind of real estate? You have 4.58 million or 8.6% active mortgages that are in furlough, right? So they're not paying their mortgage payments. And, you have the same kind of thing happening in commercial real estate. So why don't you explain to us what you think is going on and what you see in the future? And we were talking about this really interesting piece just before we came on camera. So
Yeah, there's so many cross currents with real estate. It's tough to put it all in one bucket and analyze it. It's as an example, I think a lot of people are moving out toward the suburbs and moving to more rural areas because they see what's gone on with COVID or the lockdowns. And they're like, listen, I need to be in a place where maybe I can grow my own food, where I've got some more freedom, where I can go outside when I want to go outside without a mask, and maybe I can jog around my own property. I'm not going to be cooped up in this high-rise apartment like I was in Medellin. And as we were talking off camera, that's exactly why I'm in St. Bart's right now. It's to get some more of that freedom. So I think people are coming to that conclusion. So you've got a lot of the properties in high density urban areas that I think if you look at the numbers, the sales are getting pretty soft, and it's definitely a buyer's market, where if you go out to the suburbs or a little further, then there's a lot of demand still for those properties. On the demand side of the equation, you listed some statistics about unemployment, but it's very difficult to kind of take any conclusion from those type of stats because of how the government, and through the Fed monetizing the deficit, is really they're really skewing the data, from the sense that I was talking to Lynn Alden just the other day, and she was pointing out how although we might have, call it 15%, 20% U6 unemployment, and that's probably even a little low. The unemployment numbers are very similar to the CPI, and that I believe it's definitely understated. Absolutely. So let's just say we've got 20% unemployment, but then you've got, I think it was the last 2 months, the average income of Americans has actually gone up. It's gone up. even though we have 20% unemployment. And that's because so many people are getting these stimulus checks, they're getting additional unemployment, they're making more money by being at home watching Netflix than they were at their job actually producing goods and services. So this is why you might not see a complete collapse of the real estate market like you would expect with a COVID type situation. But again, my main point is that it's tough to paint real estate with broad strokes. You've got to look at it at a local level. And I think it would also be different from state to state. And that some of these markets that are what I would consider cyclical, and I get this term from my buddy Jason Hartman, you categorize these markets into cyclical markets, hybrid markets, and more linear markets. So an example of a cyclical market would be like San Francisco or New York, where they go way up with price appreciation, but then they come crashing down, where you've got a market like Little Rock, Arkansas, or Kansas City, which, yeah, it goes up a little bit, down a little bit, but it really doesn't move too much. So you've got to ask the question, what type of market are you looking at? Then you have to ask the question, is it in the suburbs? Is it downtown? Is it high density living? Is it more rural? And then you can start coming to some conclusions. But then on a macro level too, I think you've got to ask yourself what the probabilities are of the Fed continuing to support the government with all of these stimulus checks, and what's going to happen with the TGA. And I don't know if you've been talking about the Treasury General account on your YouTube channel.
I haven't. Could you
want me to go into that briefly?
Please, yes, please.
Okay, so the TGA is the Treasury General account. It's basically the checking account for the Treasury. Prior to 2008, this was held in the commercial banking system. In 2008, the Fed went to the Treasury, ironically enough, and said, hey guys, we'd love it if you'd help us out and bring that account into the Fed. So now it's kind of underneath the Fed's umbrella. Why that matters is because when money goes into the TGA, it takes bank reserves out of the system. So the Fed could come in with the quantitative easing. They could buy the long end of the yield curve to try to keep interest rates down. And that if they felt as though there were too many bank reserves in the system, so inflation was running hot, then the TGA or the Treasury could just allow their account to go up by not spending as much money into the economy or delaying the spending, and then that would take those reserves out of the system. So it was just kind of this management tool. And if an astute listener or viewer is saying, wow, that sounds a lot like quantitative easing, bingo, that's right. Exactly. So what happened is, why I said it was ironic earlier, is that by the Fed asking the Treasury to bring that account underneath the Fed's umbrella, it effectively gave the Treasury the power to do their own quantitative easing or their own quantitative tightening. Because if they spend money into the economy, then that creates additional bank reserves, which is basically quantitative easing. And if they suck up money out of the economy by not spending as much as they typically would, then that's quantitative tightening. And just to give the viewers a little bit better understanding of how it works, because I'm sure a lot of them say, well, the government, they've got all these bills, they can't just not pay them. But what happens, it's a lot like having your rent on your apartment or your home, where the rent is due every single month. But if you go to the landlord and say, listen, for whatever reason, I'm not going to pay the next couple months, but at the end of the third month, I'll just pay you all in one lump sum. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. Right. So when the government passes a stimulus package, as an example, the Treasury doesn't have to spend all that money at one time. They can collect the tax revenue. They can issue bonds or treasuries at the Treasury auctions. And then they're sucking up all that money. And then when they, let's say 2 or 3 months down the road, just like you paying your landlord in one lump sum, they can spend all the money that's been earmarked. And that just gives a huge sugar rush to the economy and potentially to the stock market because of the additional bank reserves. So again, to give it more context, if we look at QE3, that was about $80 billion per month. And we know what that did to the stock market. Well, right now, the TGA has over 1.7 trillion with a T, in their account. So let's think this through. If you're the administration and you want to win the election. And I'm not saying this is exclusive to Trump. I think any administration, Obama or the Republican, Democrat, they all do the same thing. They all try to buy votes before the election. So you're basically accumulating this war chest of bank reserves and money, this cash bazooka that you can unleash into the economy just before the election, that's like 10 times the size of, if not more, the 20 times the size of a month of quantitative easing back in QE3. So this is just a huge factor in the macro landscape that not too many people are talking about. And I think that it's definitely going to be used. So then the question becomes, okay, well, how are they going to get that to the real economy?
That's what I was going to ask.
And I think they're going to do it through more stimulus checks and through more of just direct payments, just MMT, helicopter money, UBI, whatever you want to call it. I just don't see that going away. You've got this weird type of environment where the Republicans are on board for what is essentially just more unemployment benefits. And obviously the Democrats are going to be on board for that. So I don't see that going away anytime soon prior to the election. And then if Biden gets in, I mean, do we really think that he's going to take away the unemployment benefits or the additional unemployment benefits that people have grown accustomed to because of what's going on with COVID? And if we're getting a second wave or a third wave and the economy is still in a recession, if not a depression, I just don't see that going away. So then how does that play into housing? You talked about the furloughs and people postponing their mortgage payments. Well, what if we go on what's effectively a permanent holiday with the Fed taking all those mortgages onto their balance sheet so they can take a haircut on the mortgages or the mortgage payments, and it doesn't really matter. And we know that the Fed, I think secretly they know, just like you and I know well, that the US economy is really based on three things. It's debt, confidence, and asset prices. And the key there is probably asset prices. And I think the Fed, although they won't admit it, I think they know that well. So that's one way that they could prop up the housing market when left to its own devices. And if we actually had price discovery, which obviously we don't, the home prices would go down, probably even in the suburbs. But I know it's a very long-winded answer for a pretty short question.
Well, but no, everything is so complicated and convoluted. But I want to talk about the bazooka a little bit, because it looks like the Fed front-loaded this QE this time. And they did everything. And then over the last 3 weeks, when you look at their balance sheet, it started to come down a little bit. Now, I don't think they're going to be able to do that, but how long, that goes to the confidence question, how long do you think they're going to have the ability to just prop everything up?
I think that the Fed put might have expired. And if you go back to March, right around our last conversation or a little after that, remember when the Fed was supposed to meet on a Wednesday and they had that emergency meeting on a Sunday where they dropped the interest rates 100 basis points down to zero. And then they announced like a commitment of $1 trillion a day in repo, some ridiculous amount. And
unlimited.
QE infinity, And the market, when it opened up on Monday, went up. I think it was maybe 300 or 400 points. And this is when we were having just massive volatility. But after about 3 or 4 hours of the market being open, it just tanked again. So basically the market, to me, was saying, listen, Fed, we get it. You're going to try to prop up the market, but with all this extra liquidity, with increasing bank reserves, with increasing base money, but we're done playing the game. We're not going to continue to go up just because you're doing QE or whatever 4-letter program or 5-letter program that you're proposing. Then what happened after maybe 2 or 3 days is the market started to go up, but if my memory serves me right, the market really didn't start to go up until the government came in and said,
Right.
okay, we're going to take the reins and we're going to start fiscal spending. We're going to do a $3 trillion stimulus or whatever it was proposing, a $6 trillion. And that's when the market said, okay, we're done with the Fed put, but we like this fiscal spending. This sounds really, really good. So maybe the Fed put has expired and it's been replaced by a government put. So in the moving forward, I think that the Fed balance sheet may not play as much of a role as it did before. And we've got to look at the political narrative coming out of Washington to determine how it's going to affect the market. But see, I don't think
That's kind of scary
I know,
with how
I know.
dysfunctional.
Yeah, it might be just as predictable though, because I think before, you had that kind of one side opposing big deficits, and although I think they just did that just in the public, and behind scenes, they're all just big government people, whether they're on the right or the left.
I agree.
But now it seems like you've got this attitude that, yeah, well, let's just print the money. I mean, why don't we just spend it? We've got the power. And I think that as a narrative in society and in politics, people have come to the assumption that inflation is dead. And we never, ever, ever have to worry about inflation again. It's just the boogeyman under the bed that all you Austrians keep talking about and never comes to fruition. And they circle back to 2008, say, look at all the money printing the Fed was doing. They took their balance sheet from 800 billion all the way up to 4.5 trillion. And all you Austrians were sitting there talking about inflation, and it never happened, it never happened, it never happened. Now, of course, it happened in asset prices and other places. But as far as them just looking at the CPI, and I would argue that it actually was in consumer prices, it's just the CPI
I would
didn't
too.
reflect it. But they're just looking strictly at the CPI, claiming victory, that inflation is just something that we should never worry about again. So if inflation isn't something we should worry about, then why not just print up the money and give it to people and let them spend it? Why on earth are we going to work every single day when we could just print up these currency units and have all these foreigners buy the goods and services that we need to enjoy life? And we can just set up this Instagram account and go to Thailand and be a Instagram influencer on the beach of Bali, or whatever. What are we doing producing all these goods and services? That's crazy talk. So I think that because you have this narrative that inflation is dead, we're going to see more and more money printing, and it's going to be pretty much bipartisan. I think that both parties are for it. Just it's a matter of to what degree they're going to want to print this money. So if we've gone from that Fed put to a government put where the market likes more and more fiscal spending, and we're going to get more and more fiscal spending, then I think that that could take the stock market to all-time highs. It could definitely be a tailwind. Now, I'm not saying I'm bullish on the stock market by any means. I am the biggest stock market bear when you look at the actual fundamentals of the market and the economy. But it's just, that's just old school thinking, unfortunately, where those people think that the stock market actually has something to do with the economy. And I would argue that there's almost an inverse relationship, and that the worse the economy does, the better the stock market will most likely do, because it's just a game of liquidity. And if the real economy is suffering, they're just going to print.
Exactly.
And that's going to somehow find its way into the market. But I think, obviously, if this plays out, you're looking at kind of a stagflationary type of environment. We've talked about this before. That's going to be great for gold. It's going to be great for silver. And I think it's also going to be potentially really good for commodities. Commodities are very cheap right now when you look at them historically speaking. And if you think about this fiscal spending that especially the left always talks about, but the right's been talking about it a lot as well, in addition to the stimulus and directly putting money in people's back pocket. But it's always about infrastructure spending. Infrastructure.
They talk about it a lot, don't they?
Yeah, it's always infrastructure spending. Well, that requires a lot of commodities. And maybe we go from this big commodity boom last time being driven from emerging markets to this time, the commodity boom is going to be driven by developed economies like the United States just doing all this fiscal spending.
Except that when you're talking about MMT, modern money theory, and you're talking, I mean, the current extra unemployment benefits are supposed to end the end of next week unless Congress passes something. And people aren't really, well, there are a number of reasons why people don't want to go back to work. They don't feel safe and secure. Their kids aren't in school, and they may be making more money with that extra bonus for unemployment. So if the government just gives you money, why go back to work? Why go and hammer roads or whatever they're going to do, build bridges, etc.? Why bother to do that?
Well, yeah, but that's a great point, Lynette. But if we think this through, then that requires the government to pay them even more to get off the couch, which is even more inflationary. They've got to increase the deficit. They got to print even more money. Instead of paying them 40 or 50 grand a year, they're like, no way, I'm going to sit home and make my 35 or 40 just sitting on the couch or playing on the beach of Bali with my Instagram account. So then the government has to come in and say, okay, fine, we won't give you 50. We'll give you 100 grand a year just to get off your couch and dig this hole.
They're talking about that. That's part of it. To get people to go back to work, they'll pay them a bonus to go back to work.
Yeah, you're talking. Yeah, I saw that proposal in one of the new stimulus packages, or the stimulus package proposal, whatever they call it. Did you see the one about them giving you a $4,000 tax break just to go on vacation?
I didn't see that one. Oh my God.
And get this, you know how they have these stupid acronyms for everything that's like some PR guy thought of it in his back room? They're calling it the TRIP program, TRIP. Ha 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 ha. And that's where they give you $4,000 to basically go on vacation more than 50 miles away from your home, and they give you $500 per kid as far as a tax deduction. I mean, it's getting to that level of insanity where we're paying people to go to work, or we're paying them bonuses to go back to work, and we're paying people to go on vacation.
Yeah, it's crazy. But you also talked about the stock market, right? And that all of this different spending just will push the stock market higher, keeping in mind. It could.
I don't think there's any, yeah.
And I'll bet it does too. I mean, it has so far. It's just defying, that also is defying gravity. But remember, in Venezuela, they had the best stock market in the world from 2012 through 2018, as their currency was massively devaluing. I mean, it was hyperinflating away to nothing. And that really takes us to the confidence piece again.
Yeah, you know, Lynette, that's a fantastic point. And one thing that just dawned on me, and I haven't done the research on this, but I would be very curious to look at how much the market has gone up as far as in percentage terms since, let's say, April, and when these stimulus checks started to go out, and compare that to how much food prices have gone up.
Oh, yeah.
And wouldn't that be interesting if food prices had actually gone up more than the stock market? And that takes you right back to Venezuela. Does it matter if you've made 20% on your stock portfolio? If the cost of groceries has gone up by 25%, you're still losing purchasing power.
Exactly. But that's that nominal confusion piece. Oh, look I'm making so much money. And it's not really true, because what matters is what you can buy with it. But that kind of takes us to what's happening in this country anyway, since we have people from all around the world, and I think this is true all around the world. But you have both spot gold, so the contracts for spot gold and spot silver, that have now broken out. They've broken above key resistance levels. You've got, when I checked before I came in to do this, I think spot silver was north of $23 an ounce. And so it's always like you hold your hand on a spring, and when you release your hand, boom, the prices shoot up. So that I think goes back to 2014, 2013. And you've got spot gold that before I came in here was like north of 1866. So what, less than $35 away from its current all-time high, the next resistance level. So why do you think that that gold, I'm sorry, I know this is kind of a silly question, but why do you think that gold and silver are behaving that way right now, spot?
I think, well, let me give you an answer that you're probably not expecting. I think it might go back to the repo market.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at 2008, when Lehman went bust and we had Bear Stearns, and you saw that gold prices were extremely volatile.
Yep.
And when you would have one of these banking crises, the gold actually really fell dramatically because these big hedge funds and financial players needed liquidity.
Yep.
And the only thing they could sell on their balance sheet to get the funds and the liquidity they needed would be gold or would be silver. So you see the price really fall substantially. And what happened that when fundamentals actually started to matter again was when the Fed came in and, we'll call it, fixed the problem with air quotes, because obviously they didn't fix it, but the market perceived it to be a fix when they came out with QE1. Then all of a sudden, okay, now the hedge funds and the financial guys and gals are saying, okay, we don't need the liquidity as bad. We don't need to sell our gold. You don't have that big supply hitting the market. And then everyone else, it dawns on them, holy cow, the Fed is printing up funny money like there's no tomorrow. I need to buy gold. And that's where you see gold go up on this run. So, and think back to March. We had this big, same thing. We had the repo fails, and I won't go into that. That's esoteric stuff. I need a whiteboard to explain that. But the repo fails spiked dramatically, which would imply there's a lack of liquidity in the system. So you saw gold go down. Also, Bitcoin went down as well. But you saw gold go down substantially, and everyone's scratching their head saying, wait a minute, the world's coming to an end. Why on earth is gold selling off? And I think it goes back to 2008, the same liquidity thing. But when the Fed, or maybe it's the government this time, because now maybe there's a government put, but whenever the psychology changes to where they think that they, meaning the market, or the big hedge fund players, financial institutions, think that there's been a Band-Aid over it, then they look around and say, oh my gosh, the Fed's balance sheet has gone from 4 trillion to 7 trillion. The US is running, $3-4 trillion deficits. And let's not forget that prior to COVID hitting, when we were supposedly in the greatest economy in American history, the deficit as a percentage of GDP was at like 5-6%. And we've never seen the deficit there unless we're in a huge recession. So we were at recession level deficits prior to COVID, where if you look at Trump's Twitter feed, we're in this industrial boom like the late 1800s, right? Like it's the greatest economy in world history. Holy cow. So, so how can that possibly be? How can you have those two things, acting simultaneously at the same time? You just can't have it happen. So my main point there, of course, is that gold could be getting a bid because everyone is looking around saying they're taking their balance sheet to the extreme levels. We're going to infinity and beyond, as Buzz Lightyear always says, with the balance sheet and with these deficits, with the stimulus checks, with everything that's going on. Right. And I think also, too, the market wisely is looking at the Fed's balance sheet. What the government's doing is saying, how are they going to unwind this?
They're
right?
not.
Yeah, how does the Fed unwind their balance sheet? How do they take it back down to 800 billion? And how does the government stop with all of this? And they say, well, to your point, they can't. And then all the liquidity issues have a Band-Aid on them, just like they got in 2008. So that's why you see gold go straight up. And now, obviously, silver is catching up. But, one point I want to make is when I was in Ecuador, I spent a lot of time in South America. I've traveled to 40 different countries, 40 plus. But in Ecuador, they subsidize the price of fuel to where it's basically you can get it for like 50 cents a gallon, let's say. And it's been like this for, I believe, over 20 years. So think about if you do that with an economy, and the economy gets built around this artificial price and a subsidy. So if you just take that subsidy away, it's like trying to pull the tablecloth out from all the silverware. It's that house of cards just keeps crashes down in on itself because you've built the economy around something that's totally artificial and longer term is unsustainable. So how is that any different than us going out and us meaning the United States and doing this, we'll call it stimulus, UBI, and especially if they continue with it, which I think they will.
They have to.
Over the next 2-3 years. It's just like that fuel subsidy in Ecuador, where the entire economy and people's behavioral patterns and their spending patterns gets built around getting this $2,000 a month just hitting their bank account without them having to go out and lift a finger. So then how do they take that away? The answer is they can't. And then the only release valve to that long term, of course, is the dollar and consumer price inflation.
Exactly. And, inflation will always outpace the average income. So even going to a universal basic income, even though that sounds really good, it's just like what the average income in 1970 was 9,500, and now it's something like 53,000. The 53,000 sounds a whole lot better than 9,500. But the reality is you can't support a family of 4 on 53,000 like you could back in 1970.
Yeah, it's all about purchasing power, and it goes back to people just getting fixated on a nominal number instead of asking themselves how much goods and services can I actually buy with my income. It's all about purchasing power.
But you made some really interesting points too, even looking at the gold and the silver market, because what we're talking about when we're saying 1865 or $23 an ounce, that's the spot contract, and there is a very different underlying market to the physical, because even in the contracts, that's leverage. That's what that's all about. You don't have to deliver out. In theory, you're supposed to be able to take delivery of the physical. But in reality, they create a whole lot more contracts than they have available for delivery underlying. So it makes it look like there's a lot more gold and silver. And to your point, even back in March as well as 2008, I remember it really well, when there was that true flight to safety, to physical, the price of the underlying physical, the premium, exploded, because that's where you get the true demand supply side. And
I'm sorry to cut you off there, but
go ahead.
And we've just been talking about the demand side of the equation, but we really haven't talked about the supply side of the equation. And I think that's what most people miss. We're talking about people staying home and just not wanting to go back to work unless they're being paid $100,000 and how that affects their ability to pay their rent and whatnot. But we didn't talk about how those goods and services that would have been produced by that employee going back to work are no longer there. And so if you've got the demand side staying the same while the supply side is crashing, quite literally, then that's got to increase consumer prices as well. The question becomes whether that's just kind of a temporary shock or if it's longer term and it's sustained. That is just a question of probabilities. But how does that affect the gold market? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but especially like maybe a month ago or so, the spreads on like silver coins were through the roof because there was all this demand. But because of COVID, all these refineries were shut down, and they just physically couldn't produce it because the employees are all at home. So, I mean, how does that work when you've got all these fundamentals providing tailwind to the gold and silver market from the standpoint of monetary expansion and everything we're talking about, while at the same time you could see the supply go to basically zero because people
Exactly.
are afraid to leave their homes or just refusing to go in and actually produce the gold coins that people want to buy.
Well, and that has an impact on the collectible coins that are already out there, the pre 33s, right? And those were easier to get during that period of time that you were talking about. And those premiums went up a little bit, and we're still seeing premiums in products, not as high as it was
Mhm.
back then, but we will definitely see those premiums again. And
Yeah.
I think, to your point with how much new money they're creating and the UBI and, going back, all these crazy schemes to get the consumer to continue to
Yeah.
consume.
The TRIP program. Don't forget the TRIP program, Lynette.
I mean, I could use a nice trip somewhere. Maybe I'll come see you in St. Bart's where there's more freedom.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds so pleasant, doesn't it? They always make it seem like, oh, well, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, the TRIP program. I think I can buy that. Yeah.
You always have to be very, very aware. But, when I'm looking at what the government's doing, what the central bankers are doing, and I'm talking globally now, what I'm seeing is entities that absolutely 100% know they're going bankrupt. And so they might as well just go for it. If they've got the credit card and there's no limit on it, and as long as they can keep getting that credit, why not? And have you been hearing a lot of talk about the reset that I've been talking about forever, but now I'm hearing it all over the place? Are you hearing that as well?
The reset of what exactly?
Well, the World Economic Forum coming up in 2021 has
Okay.
named their event the Great Reset. And they're talking about resetting society as well as the financial system. And they're not the only ones that are talking about it. So I think that what they're trying to do is really get us prepared for it. Universal basic income. That's part of it. Give people all of this money, let them feel like they're really getting something so that over here they can change everything. And then by the time you know about it, it's really too late to do anything about it.
Yeah. I think it gives them a great opportunity to go cashless as well.
Oh my
Yeah, and
God.
I think in our conversations, I'm sure at some point in time we've talked about them banning cash. But if you think about the last round of stimulus, it was, I wasn't in the States, so I don't know this for a fact, but what I heard on Twitter and FinTwit is that the government was really having a hard time getting the stimulus checks actually to the people, and they sent them to 1 million people that are dead and all these problems. And I think it's an easy sell for the government to say, listen, what we need you to do from now on, if you want your stimulus check, right the day it goes out, just download and I've been calling it the Freedom Act or the Freedom app, because like Ron Paul says, everything that the government does as far as their plan, what they name it, it just has the opposite effect, like
Absolutely.
Patriot Act, right? So of
Yeah,
course, this
absolutely.
banning of cash would take away your freedom. So that's why I'm assuming they'll call it the Freedom app. So you download the Freedom app on your phone, and the Fed or the Treasury, they can just type in the digits into their computer, and bam, it just the $1,000 or $2,000 or Fed, if we're not calling them dollars, Fed coins, Orwells, whatever you want to call them, they show up on your phone, and then you can just go right to the local Starbucks and you can just swipe the barcode, and bam, you get your coffee, and it reduces your Fed bucks by $5 or whatever it is. And I think especially the millennial generation and the younger generations look at that and say, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. That's the best idea. Now I don't have to wait for this stupid thing in the mail or get direct deposit into my bank account. I mean, that's such a pain in the ass. And then I've got to take this ATM card around with me everywhere. Boy, what a great idea. I'm so glad we have these politicians in the office that are just looking out for my best interest. Let me go to the iTunes store right now and download that just while we're on this call, Lynn. And so I think it's an easy sell there. But then what that does, of course, is it allows them to say, well, you've got this Fed app, you've got the $2,000 of Fed bucks going to your app. You don't really need that cash. I mean, go ahead and give that to the bank, and the bank will give that to the Fed. We'll just replace the bank reserves. We could just become a cashless society. It'll be so much better, so much more efficient that way. But if you're asking yourself the question, which you probably should be, why would they do that? What's the advantage? What's the motivation for the government or the Fed to enact such a policy? Here's what I think the rationale would be behind the scenes. We know, and we talked about this off camera, that if you have debt, you like inflation, because you get to pay that debt back with a deflated currency, with inflated currency units. So you're paying the debt back with cheaper dollars, let's say.
Right, exactly.
And so, the government, as you know, is the biggest debtor of all time, over 26 trillion in debt right now. And that's on balance sheet. So there's no one or no entity that wants inflation more than the Fed and the government. They've obviously, they come out and even admit that they're trying to
inflate,
produce a 2% inflation rate as a target, right? So the problem, though, is before they started with these stimulus checks, it was hard for the Fed to get money into the back pocket of the consumer to where they would spend it and potentially create this inflation. Why? Because the Fed really can only print bank reserves. And that's just with the primary dealer banks, and that's a whole other conversation. But when the Fed, quote unquote, prints money, it's not, people get confused because they think that they're just injecting dollars right into the system. And it's not really the way it works. There's not a causal effect. There could be a correlation there. What happens is when they, quote unquote, print money, they're creating more bank reserves, and they're just swapping those bank reserves for assets that the primary dealers have on their balance sheets, such as mortgage-backed securities, or mortgage-backed sausages, as I like to call them.
I think that's a good description.
Yeah, you
mortgage-backed sausages.
Like a sausage.
Yeah.
But or these treasuries, taking them off the primary dealer balance sheet and putting them onto the Fed, and then these primary dealers or the banks under the Fed umbrella have more bank reserves. So then the question becomes, what do they do with the bank reserves? It does give them extra balance sheet capacity to create more loans in the real economy. If they create more loans, then yes, it is technically increasing the money supply. But the transfer mechanism there is still the commercial banking system.
Exactly.
Now, the government can come in and spend money too, but traditionally, or spend it kind of into existence if the Fed is monetizing it. But that's kind of an asset swap as well. So that kind of gets a little murky. But traditionally, the commercial banking system is really what controls the majority of the money supply, the additional money supply, or the destruction of money supply too when people are paying down debt. So my point is that the Fed really struggles with how to be proactive and have total control over the rate of inflation.
I think.
So go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, I was going to say, I think that's why they're working so hard on central bank digital currencies. In fact, something just came from the IMF today. I haven't dug into it that far, but they're talking about giving you and me, the public, access to SDRs directly at the IMF or directly at the Federal Reserve, directly to the central bank, bypassing the banks.
Yeah, so exactly. So here's how I think that would play out. Whether it's an SDR, whether it's a Fed buck, a Fed coin, a dollar, whatever you want to call it, I think it goes back to the app that we were talking about, and that's the transfer mechanism that replaces the commercial banking system. So now the monetary mandarins, as Jim Grant calls them, can get that money directly into the bank accounts of the people and circumnavigate the banking system. But then the question becomes velocity, Lynn. How do you get up that velocity, right? Because how do you know people aren't just going to take the money and save it? Remember, they tried this experiment in Japan, and the Japanese didn't spend the money, they saved it. So
well, that just happened with all those stimulus checks where we saw personal savings rate jump to 33%. So all those $1,200 and $2,400, they either open an account at Robinhood, and which was really interesting. I don't know if you heard that or not, but they opened, I don't know,
They
millions.
bought bankrupt companies, right?
Right, but all the new accounts, or most of the new accounts that were opened, were either $1,200 or $2,400 new accounts. So,
of course.
right. So people either put it into their savings account or they went into the market to play with it, and they didn't really go out shopping.
Right. So here's where I think that could change. And going back to the Fed app is, let's just say the Fed or the Treasury say, what we need is additional velocity. Okay, how can we do that? Let's give them $2,000, but since we can control how they spend it, because now it's on an app that the government controls, we can program those Fed bucks to disappear if they're not spent within, let's say, 30 days. So now, and you can't buy stocks with it. Remember, they could control that because it's a digital currency that's basically code. So they could say, they could limit to where you actually spend the money, where you'd have to spend it on consumer goods and consumption, because they're all Keynesians. They think that boosts the economy. And then if they didn't get velocity up to where they wanted, or if inflation doesn't get to where they want, they could just lower the time frame from 30 days to 15 days. And if they don't get that, they bring it down to 5 days. And then if it's still not there, they could go from giving you $2,000 to $5,000. And this may sound fantastic to a lot of people that are watching this podcast or this show, but you have to realize there is no free lunch. And while there are some people that it's very true, that would increase their purchasing power substantially, it would be decreasing the purchasing power of all the savers in the United States, all the retirees, anyone that's on a fixed income. It would be a transfer of wealth from those savers to the consumers. There's no free lunch. On aggregate total, the spending and the purchasing power is going to be the same. It's just a matter of who has that purchasing power and who is losing the purchasing power.
Really, really good point. And this time has just flown by. I wish we could do this all over again, because there's so much more to talk about. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to really talk about the new programs that you're doing on your channel, because everybody needs to know about what's going on.
Yeah, well, I do the whiteboard videos. I'm trying to do those 2 times a week still. It's a little hard here in St. Bart's, but we're going to get back on that schedule when I get situated. We've got the Rebel Capitalist Show, and I'm interviewing awesome, amazing macro thinkers, such as yourself. We're going to get you on the show very, very soon again. And in addition to that, I started something called Rebel Capitalist Pro, which is at georgegammon.com/pro. And what this is a digital product that really helps you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments. That's kind of my tagline. And it's an online community for like-minded individuals. We kind of lean Austrian. We're all about gold, Bitcoin, buying deep value, commodities. We don't really like the Fed. We don't like high-flying stocks that are expensive like Tesla and Netflix. But it also has a lot of value in the form of the research we have within the community. And I have Lynn Alden, who I'm sure most of your viewers know. She's one of the most brilliant minds in all of macro, along with Chris McIntosh, who is equally as brilliant. We have their research reports that come out either weekly or bi-weekly. That's included in the forum. And in addition to that, we do live streams either 1 to 2 times per week with Chris and Lynn, where the members can ask them questions directly. They can ask me. I'm usually moderating, and then we can talk about their most recent research. So it's a fantastic program. I definitely suggest everyone checking it out at georgegammon.com/pro. And thank you very much for allowing me to pitch it there.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, we have the link to that, as well as all your other links, in the description below, and it'll be on our blog as well, so they know easily how to get a hold of you, which they should. George, this has just been such a pleasure, as always, and you proved your intro. You lived up to it.
Good, good. Whew, boy, I was worried about that. All right, monkey off the back there. Whew, boy.
There
All
you
right.
go.
I can sleep
There
well
you
tonight.
go. Yes, you should. This was a lot of work and I really appreciate it. And for all of our viewers, remember, it is absolutely time to cover your assets. And you do that with the financial shield, which is made of physical gold and physical silver in your possession, which is where you need it when you need it. It's pretty simple. But until tomorrow, please, please be safe out there. Bye-bye.